2025 gave us some incredible games. Big comebacks, risky experiments, and projects that actually remembered why people loved games in the first place. But for every great release, there was also a disaster. Games that disappointed, games that lied, and games that should have never launched in the state they did. Welcome to BO3GG Gaming, and these are the worst games of 2025. No sugarcoating and no excuses. Let's start. And first on the list is Avowed, a game many people genuinely believed in, because it comes from Obsidian Entertainment, the studio behind Fallout New Vegas and The Outer Worlds. In that situation, expectations weren't just high, they were deserved, which makes the disappointment even harder. Avowed fails at almost every fundamental RPG level. Combat feels weak and weightless, enemy encounters lack tension, the story is bland, and dialogue choices barely matter, even when the game pretends they do. There's no real player freedom, no meaningful variation, and very little reason to replay anything you've already seen. Yes, the lore of the universe is interesting on paper, but what's the point of deep world building if interacting with that world is boring? The longer you play, the clearer it becomes that this doesn't feel like an Obsidian game at all, but rather a safe, corporate RPG hiding behind a legendary studio name. For a 2025 release, Avowed feels stale, lifeless, and shockingly forgettable. Next up is Call of Duty Black Ops 7, and what makes it hurt even more is that 2025 was actually a strong year for shooters. Battlefield 6 went back to its roots, Arc Raiders took risks and experimented, and then there's Black Ops 7 doing absolutely nothing right. This might be one of the worst Call of Duty entries of the last decade, not because it tried something new, but because it barely tried at all. The backlash started even before release, and once the game launched, it only got worse. The single-player campaign is borderline absurd, replacing an actual story with recycled Warzone-style content lazily wrapped in the Black Ops name. Boss fights include a giant mutant man, a mutated flower, a stationary turret, a helicopter, and a completely ridiculous machete duel with Menendez, which feels less like a climax and more like a parody. Multiplayer doesn't help either, since it repeats the same problems from previous years without fixing or evolving anything, all while being sold at full premium price. Visually, Call of Duty still looks years behind what a modern shooter should be. At this point, the only real hope is that Activision finally listens to player feedback, because until then, many fans have already moved on to Battlefield. And here we are, the so-called GTA killer in all its glory. Meet Mind's Eye, easily the worst game of 2025. This project was heavily hyped, created by one of the original GTA developers, backed by a big budget and even bigger ambition, and yet the final result is a broken, unfocused mess. Shooting feels stiff and unsatisfying, driving is clunky and unresponsive, the open world is empty and pointless, the story is painfully dumb, and technical issues follow you constantly no matter what platform you're playing on. Mind's Eye was supposed to be a cyberpunk spy thriller full of intense shootouts, high-speed chases, and drone-based gameplay. But instead it feels like a mediocre action game that would have been outdated even in 2010. Nobody actually needed a GTA killer, but a focused, narrative-driven game in the style of LA Noire or Mafia could have worked perfectly for this concept. Instead, the developers chased scale, hype, and ego, and the project collapsed almost immediately after launch. Mind's Eye isn't ambitious, it's embarrassing. Now let's talk about one of the greediest decisions of the year, because Nintendo somehow thought it was a good idea to sell Switch 2 Welcome Tour as a paid product. This is essentially a tutorial and a tech demo, something that should have been pre-installed on every console, just like Astro's Playroom was on PS5. Instead, Nintendo decided to charge money for it. Unlike Astro's Playroom, which was a fully designed game that showed off the console's features in a fun way, Welcome Tour is just a collection of boring mini-games and basic information disguised as content. Even if it were free, many players wouldn't bother launching it, and the fact that Nintendo put a price tag on it only made things worse. Expectations were already low, and somehow Nintendo still failed to meet them. Next up is FBC Firebreak from Remedy, a co-op FPS set after the events of Control, where players take on the role of a cleanup squad restoring the oldest house. On paper, that sounds interesting, but in reality, the game is painfully shallow. The tonal shift completely misses the mark. Control was dark, serious, and atmospheric, while Firebreak is colorful, chaotic, and often feels like a joke that doesn't understand its own universe. Gameplay is wildly inconsistent, with some weapons feeling acceptable and others feeling completely useless, while most abilities barely matter at all. Story and lore are almost non-existent, reducing the experience to repetitive cleanup missions against leftover hiss enemies. The biggest problem, however, is the lack of content, because with only 5 missions available, you've essentially seen everything the game has to offer after just a couple of hours. 2 hours in, and there's no real reason to keep playing. Lost Soul Aside is a perfect example of a game that lost the moment its marketing went too far. For years, it was presented as the next Final Fantasy, a deep RPG with an emotional story, complex combat, and a massive journey. Those comparisons built huge expectations, and ultimately destroyed the game. Visually, Lost Soul Aside looks impressive, but once you get past the graphics, the experience is surprisingly shallow. The story tries to be emotional but lacks strong writing. The dialogue feels awkward, and the characters never truly stick with you. Combat is flashy and stylish at first, but very quickly you realize there's no real weight, depth, or evolution to it, which makes encounters feel repetitive rather than engaging. Exploration is limited, level design is mostly linear, sound design is inconsistent, and worst of all, the game is not what it was marketed as. This is not a deep RPG, it's a fairly straightforward action game that, after years of delays and hype, was forgotten almost immediately. In 2025, just okay is simply not enough. Splitgate 2 answers a question nobody was asking. The original game stood out because of its portal mechanic combined with simple, fast-paced arena shooting. The sequel somehow manages to miss the point entirely. Portals are no longer used in creative or meaningful ways, and the new maps rarely support them properly. Instead of refining what worked, the developers added unnecessary systems that overcomplicate the gameplay and clash with the simplicity that made Splitgate fun. The addition of a Battle Royale mode felt like pure trend chasing, and was rejected almost immediately by the community. On top of that, the monetization is aggressive. Progression feels unrewarding, and there's very little reason to keep playing. After heavy criticism and a failed launch, Splitgate 2 was pushed back into beta. Whether it can recover is still an open question, but as it stands, the sequel feels unnecessary and misguided. And here we have a sequel trapped by its own legendary name. Bloodlines 2 spent years in development hell, switched studios, and carried massive expectations as the follow-up to one of the most beloved RPGs of all time. The problem is simple, this is no longer an RPG. Bloodlines 2 leans heavily toward action, with limited player choice, shallow clan identity, and a mostly linear main story. The meaningful decisions that defined the original are almost completely gone, and side quests lack the depth and personality fans were hoping for. There are a few bright spots. Certain characters, like Fabian, actually stand out. But overall, this feels like a completely different game wearing the Bloodlines name. Same title, different soul. It's a textbook example of selling a legendary brand while delivering something that doesn't live up to it. Little Nightmares 3 looked promising at first. New setting, 2 protagonists, a chance to evolve the formula. The demo gave hope. The full release crushed it. Yes, the visuals are strong, the art direction is solid, lighting is well done, and the environments look great. But that's where the praise ends. Levels feel recycled, locations are often empty, and the emotional connection that defined the previous games is completely missing. The characters feel more like mannequins than living beings, with no chemistry or meaningful interaction between them. The co-op system is the biggest failure here. There's no local co-op, the online co-op is poorly designed, and instead of true cooperation, one player often just stands around waiting while the other does all the work. Gameplay quickly becomes repetitive, puzzles lack creativity, and huge sections of the game feel unfinished. This isn't a proper sequel. It's a hollow imitation that looks good in screenshots and fails everywhere else. And finally, Borderlands 4. A perfect example of how to waste a massive budget, a legendary franchise, and years of goodwill. The PC launch was a disaster. Unreal Engine 5 optimization was awful, with performance issues even on high-end hardware. Instead of addressing the problems, Gearbox CEO Randy Pitchford openly blamed players, telling them to upgrade their PCs or stop complaining. Gameplay-wise, Borderlands 4 is stuck in the past. The core loop hasn't meaningfully evolved. Same enemy waves, same loot grind, same damage numbers. And the biggest loss? The humor. Borderlands was always known for its chaotic, absurd, and often dark comedy. Here, it's replaced with awkward seriousness that doesn't fit the franchise at all. Then there's the price. $70 to $80 for a product that launched unfinished and unoptimized. Borderlands 4 didn't satisfy longtime fans, didn't attract new players, and ended up doing the worst thing possible, killing trust in a once great franchise. And that's how Borderlands 4 closes our list, as the final reminder that even the biggest names can fall the hardest. And that was it. The worst games of 2025. Disappointments, wasted potential, and releases that should have never launched the way they did. Let's hope next year gives us fewer of these and more games worth remembering. This was BO3GG Gaming. See you soon.